So, in an age where a single tweet, Glassdoor review, or leadership misstep can spiral into a headline, managing your organization's reputation isn't just the job of the PR team. It's increasingly part of HR's role. Culture, behavior, crisis response, employee activism, it all feeds into how the world sees us. So I am really delighted that I'm joined today by someone who's at the forefront of helping organizations navigate this complex landscape. So Lis Anderson, founder of the award-winning PR agency Ambitious, and she's an expert in brand reputation, crisis communications, and strategic storytelling. Welcome, Lis.
Thanks very much, Lucy. Really looking forward to sort of today's session.
Well, I'm really
Yeah,
delighted having you here because it's an area where ordinarily HR and PR, we've kind of historically didn't mix quite so much. And now increasingly we do. And we're going to get into all of that in a bit. But I want to find out more about you. You work with companies across various sectors and you help them protect, promote, and sometimes repair their reputations. Is that right?
yeah, absolutely, and very much kind of our focus and my focus for many years has been working sort of in the business to business and corporate space, and it is a fascinating space.
How did you get
And
into it? How did you get into this line of work?
So my background, for now 30 plus years, has always been agency side. I love the juggle of that. I like the nothing ever stays the same sort of pace of that. And I think
Unrealistic demands from clients. You love all of
exactly
that.
all of
Yeah, we
that.
need it
Yeah.
yesterday.
No day the same, and
Yeah.
just kind of a window on lots of different industries. I'm really interested in sort of current affairs, business news generally. So it kind of gives a spotlight on all sorts of things from financial services to cybersecurity. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so how did you end up running your own agency and an award-winning agency at that?
Award-winning agency, yeah. So really proud of that, and certainly in terms of very apt for today. Sort of one of our awards, award track record is around sort of people and culture in the business, which we're very proud of. So I set the business up, be 13 years ago this year.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank
I set
you.
mine up
Yeah.
10 years ago this year.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think, it feels such a massive achievement, doesn't it? I'm sure when you set out similar to me, you don't imagine you're still going to be doing it this many years later, but it's a fantastic achievement. Well done.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so we're sort of 25 strong now, sort of Bristol based, but working for clients sort of nationally and sort of internationally, and very much kind of offering quite a range of sort of services because comms has become such an integral part of sort of business now, as well as, kind of just general day-to-day sort of running of business. So we get involved in lots of different things on behalf
Right,
of our
let's get
clients.
into it, and we're going to start with the basics. Really, how would you define reputation in today's world, and has that changed at all over, say, the last decade?
Yeah, so I mean, in a nutshell, reputation is the thing that ultimately drives opinion and perception. But certainly, kind of over the last 10 years, reputation more than ever before is absolutely about real time. It's multidimensional. And I think kind of very much kind of overlooked is absolutely employee driven. So whilst you're looking at kind of the wider stakeholders, certainly kind of with the onset of things like sort of social media, kind of employee voice is really sort of key to that in terms of reputation of a business or an organisation. And it's no longer what the brand says about itself. It's about what people are experiencing, what they're sharing.
Yeah.
And that's very much part of the change over the last sort of 5 to 10 years.
And
It's
of
much
course,
more
we've
of the
seen, haven't
words.
we, in recent years, these fantastic brands. I was listening to a podcast about Abercrombie and Fitch, for example, and of course, that was very much their reputational demise was very much about the leader and what the leader was up to. But we've equally seen, reputations that have been brilliant for a number of years suddenly decline rapidly, damaged irreparably. And it just feels to me it's one of those things that it's so precious. You spend so long building it and it can be lost so quickly.
Absolutely. And I think, where you're talking about a decade ago, reputation was very much top down. Now it's crowdsourced.
Yeah.
So the lens has completely changed, and the pace and speed in which information is available, and the scale of that, because the channels have changed. There's so much more sort of channels available to kind of voice an opinion, change perception, influence, which I think is a positive thing in PR, but it's hard for businesses to manage and keep on top of all of the things.
Yeah, and I, hopefully we'll come on to that, because I think there are a number of areas of social media that HR could potentially be using so much more as an opportunity, but also needs to be mindful that it's out there and it doesn't matter what their careers website is saying about them and how brilliant they are. Ultimately, if employees are, well, let's deal with it now, because
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very familiar with Glassdoor. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's just one avenue. But it always amazes me, when I speak to HR leaders or people who are in recruitment for a particular organization, and they're not aware of what Glassdoor is saying about them, or they're ignoring it because they think, oh, well, it's the outliers. We know who that person was. They were a pain when they worked here, and now they're saying horrible things about us. But if they're not doing actively working to do something about changing that, that's the only thing that's out there, isn't it? That outliers, that pain in the backside employee.
Yeah.
The people reading that don't know the history.
No, and maybe that is around a step change around understanding why reputation is important for HR. It's not just PR. And I think kind of certainly where you're looking at sort of employees, they are the loudest, the most credible advocates of your brand, better than any supplier, better than any customer. And I think certainly in terms of from an HR perspective, the HR sort of team or individual has access to so many touch points related to kind of employees, whether that is to so policies, onboarding, offboarding, internal communications, to gather sentiment, to help shape story, to help shape sort of narrative that is above and beyond process. It's about maybe kind of using those touch points and using that sort of process to drive more than just, I guess, a process of whether sort of staff are happy, not right on to the next. There's much more power in what HR have got and have access to, for sure.
I was always fascinated by, I haven't looked at it for a year or so, but the Edelman PR Trust Barometer that they put out
Yes,
every
yeah,
year. And for listeners who may not be aware of this, it's a free piece of research that comes out every year. They take one issue, which is the issue of trust. I think it comes out in January every year, and they have done for over a decade, I think now. And what was fascinating to me was that trust in corporations, business leaders, governments, the kind of traditional voices of authority that we would trust because they were our seniors, our so-called betters and so on, that has just declined and declined and declined. But that the trust in people like us has gone up and up and up. So I suppose it's the same as, why I would trust a TripAdvisor review from somebody I've never met, and I'm going to believe them more than I would believe the restaurant's website. And it's the same with employers, isn't it? It's that, as you say, actually employee advocacy, for good or ill, is this hugely powerful tool. And if we're not alive to that, then we're either missing out on the opportunities to really get our brand messaging and our reputation messaging out there, or we're just leaving it to chance. And I think that's an issue. What do you think HR could be doing more to kind of harness those touch points then?
yeah. So I think often, and the point that you sort of make there, very much around kind of top down, is reputation, the role of just the C-suite. Kind of feels incredibly sort of outdated. And so that link between building an authentic culture, which has to be above and beyond C-suite, into then sort of the voice of an organisation or the culture or the whole sort of heartbeat. And I think quite often that sort of, whether that's sort of middle management, almost kind of miss those guys out at your peril,
Yeah.
because there's a disconnect. It can't be to kind of pull together and help build reputation. Can't be something that is crafted and delivered as a statement from the top, and then hope that that sort of is sort of taken on board through a series of words. It's about how you live and breathe your culture, and every employee has a role to play in that. So the piece that is about linking HR, because they have access to, quite rightly, all of the touch points concerning sort of employees, and how that interacts with sort of internal comms, can be an incredibly powerful mix to get those right. But it's often very much overlooked.
And I think also we sometimes prevent our employees from being our best advocates. I remember doing some work with a bank some time ago, and they'd got this fantastic offer, and their staff were really proud of it. I think it was like you got money back on your bills or something if you paid by direct debit through this
Okay.
particular bank. And it was a great offer, and the staff were really, really proud of it. But when they were asked, why are you not talking about this on social media? You look at the social media policy that's in place, and they were terrified they were going to get sacked. They say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. And I think sometimes we're so worried about the damage that could be done to our reputation. We're not harnessing the good that our employees could do. And I really like the approach that I think it's Gap, Intel, Ford. They have much lighter touch approaches to social media guidelines for their people. They say things like play nice, use common sense. If you mess up, take it down. But they are empowering their people to get on social media and talk about the organization.
Yeah, and I think because the brand or the culture of the business is quite clear, and that is a sort of a skill about bringing that to life through then a policy or then an approach, which is essentially kind of almost sort of walking the walk.
Yeah,
So, kind of, if employees don't believe the experience that they're experiencing, that's not going to happen.
yeah,
And I think, that's absolutely about making that right for the brand or the business that employees are working in. So if that's a highly regulated industry, such as financial services, of course, there's got to be process related to that. But if that's a particular brand, like you've mentioned, sort of on a retail side, and that is the culture of the business, it's about how that's sort of brought to life. But very much, I think it's about really understanding kind of how authentic the employees find that, because if they don't believe kind of in what the business stands
yeah,
for or the culture, then you're never going to kind of engage.
yeah.
And that's certainly something that we find when we're kind of coming on board, and there might be a North Star or a vision, and that's looking then to roll out. It's just like, right, but maybe a lot of the employees aren't really experiencing that in their sort of day to day, and
Yeah,
sometimes that is about really sort of digging deep across the team, above and beyond kind of the leaders in the business.
yeah, we've all seen those horrendous values rollouts where you're being told you're given the values, and these are the new values of the organization. I also think there's something about understanding who your influencers are. We tend to always think that leaders should have more responsibility for the advocacy and the getting the message out there. But actually, there are people who we probably would have called them office gossips in the past, but the ones who love to communicate, who
Yeah.
enthuse about it. And I think that kind of identifying our influencers and legitimizing their role and giving them the tools and giving them the messages if they want to get stuff out there on LinkedIn or X or whatever it's being called this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of by that, taking that sort of inside out sort of approach and celebrating the advocates. Not everybody's going to come on board and support that as a strategy.
Yeah.
That's okay, because within an organisation there will be people that really champion that, enjoy doing that, see that as a key part of their sort of role.
Yeah.
And I think that's about kind of embracing those that are keen to do that first. And HR's got a really important job as far as sort of identifying and encouraging that within a business or organisation.
Let's have a chat about HR, the HR team and the comms team. And sometimes it's not always clear where communications, PR should sit because, I've had comms teams reporting into me and I've not had comms teams reporting into me. And there's pros and cons to both, it's always tricky. But I just wondered sort of how do you think HR and communications or PR typically collaborate in a crisis? What can get in the way?
Yeah, I think sometimes that is around sort of structure, and you're absolutely right. I think, and certainly sort of looking back at sort of 10 sort of 15 years ago, kind of PR comms often sort of reported into HR. So you'd have an HR director, now a CPO, that sort of sits on the board, and actually still in quite a lot of large organisations, comms as a discipline can often sort of report into that sort of role above and beyond maybe kind of sort of brand or marketing sort of sales. So I think kind of that's not so much maybe HR having an identity crisis, that's around kind of where comms sits in an organisation. So I think certainly kind of structurally within a business, that's important to understand kind of where that sort of sits. And I think certainly kind of what I've sort of observed over the years is quite often the relationship between the two is quite ad hoc. It's not planned. There isn't sort of a need to look at how those work together until something goes wrong. And silos often then sort of exist between HR and comms with we do this and you do that.
Yeah.
When actually in reality, those two sort of departments should be working absolutely sort of hand in hand because there is so much sort of crossover. And then maybe, kind of it's about understanding and respecting who does what. So HR absolutely understands compliance, which is essential within business, whereas kind of comms is much more around the optics, maybe the sentiment, maybe understanding kind of what's going on outside to bring sort of inside. So yeah, kind of very, very much around sort of getting those basic things and a mutual respect and understanding kind of in place that often through structure doesn't exist.
I'm in the times where, and obviously I'm referring to my time at the BBC because where else would there be a PR crisis other than at the BBC?
Yeah.
But the kind of clashes that I sometimes had with the PR comms team were typically in a couple of areas. One was around pace and speed, and the PR comms team typically wanted to move a lot more quickly than I'd be comfortable with.
Yeah.
Because I had stakeholders I needed to get on board or whatever. And actually, they were so mindful of the pace of how things would happen and the need to move at lightning speed. And then I suppose the second piece was I was always very concerned that our people within the organisation, as far as you possibly could, should know before the external. Because sometimes it would be impacting their jobs or it would be impacting their area of responsibility. Or I just wondered whether you've come across those situations before where perhaps, maybe the HR team hasn't appreciated the need for speed and the pace in which the comms world moves compared to the HR world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of part of that is the grounding in terms of certainly from an HR perspective, the responsibility there is the empathy barometer, the care and support for sort of employees and governance compliance is absolutely kind of within that field. And I think where you're looking then at sort of PR comms or in some organisations press office, there is a foot inside and outside. So if you're looking to sort of raise brand awareness, protect reputation, whatever that might be, you are always looking at the environment outside of an organisation to either help polish sort of tone, maybe polish isn't the right word on that. Yes, edit that out. But yeah, sort of to look at sort of the tone and how that might, sort of land externally,
Let's
because there
back up
might
and do
be,
that bit
yeah,
again.
okay, go on.
So,
Yeah,
basically, I've kind of asked
yeah,
you about where have you come across issues where perhaps PR teams want to
yeah,
move more quickly and HR teams are perhaps wanting to maybe haven't understood the need to move at pace.
yeah. Yeah, so very much kind of sort of see HR as sort of being gatekeepers to the empathy barometer. They have to deal with compliance, with governance, sort of employee rights, all of those sort of really important things. Whereas um, their their sort of role in that is around sort of shaping the right sort of message that probably needs consideration, might be working with additional sort of stakeholders. Whereas certainly kind of from a PR press office sort of perspective, the reason that that often moves at pace is because there is a foot inside and outside of the organisation,
Yeah,
and you are always looking at what the external factors are that might help shape a particular message, and when that kind of might be appropriate. And that is very much sort of dictated by kind of news agenda, what's happening in particular sort of sectors. And so consequently, I think kind of that news approach or that news lens can be quite alien to sort of an HR sort of team, because it's like, well, okay, haven't even got this sorted. It's like, well, okay, if we're looking to kind of land that later this week, that's not going to work because of XYZ, right? That needs to happen sort of now.
yeah,
So I think it's around kind of the pace that's sort of driven from a PR sort of news perspective.
yeah.
Very much so.
I remember it's just as you were talking then, I was thinking back to one of my clashes with the comms team at the BBC, and it was always at pay review time
Okay.
because internally I was wanting to talk up the deal and to say this is a fantastic beneficial pay deal because there wasn't much money around and the unions were obviously looking to understand, could they get more, etc. Whereas the comms team wanted to get the message out that the BBC was being really tough on pay increases, like being, protective of license fee spending. And it was always really hard to kind of find a message because it had to be the same message. We couldn't have two different messages because there's no
Yeah.
such thing as an internal message and an external message, is there? It's the same message.
Same message. Yeah.
And I was just every year that would be a real issue.
Yeah, very much. And certainly from a comms lens, you're dealing with lots of different messages all of the time. So, yes, that might be related to an HR sort of issue or a piece of news. But what happens if there's something that's happening with a project or service launch, or something that's gone kind of not to plan? So
Yeah.
maybe good news in terms of, I don't know, creating jobs, but actually there's something else that's not going so well in the channel or sort of within a particular sector. So very much kind of the job of comms is to kind of be spinning all of the plates at any one time.
You mentioned that HR and comms or PR tend to need to work together on an ad hoc basis. Um, what do you think that they could do perhaps more proactively? So working together um, in a more purposeful, deliberate way to kind of to build a more resilient reputation. How could they perhaps not wait until the crisis, but actually be more proactive?
Yeah, so that's my observation, that it often is working in an ad hoc basis. I don't necessarily think that is the way to work. So I think even where you're looking at, sort of pulling together a process around how to deal with sort of particular crises or sort of news internally that needs to go externally, how HR and PR is doing that together. So that shared learning, whether that's shared training, whether that's pulling together a shared playbook so there is agreement sort of in advance, rather than that sort of being something that gets dealt with at the time. So I think kind of the pre-planning to that is sort of really important, which certainly goes back to the structure and how the rules of engagement for HR and PR are sort of set to work as true partners within an organisation to get the best results
Yeah.
at the end of the day.
Let's have a think about the skills then before we wrap up, because I mean, I was very fortunate that I had access at the BBC to, the fantastic interviewers and people who were trained in helping me prepare for those interviews. And I ended up doing all the major news broadcasts and political programs and so on, not always very comfortably, but sort of managed to get through them. And the training I received at the BBC really helped me. But most HR people don't get that kind of training, do they, until they're suddenly in the limelight or they're having to answer questions either to the media or to politicians. What are the skills you think, either in terms of that crisis management or generally about, brand reputation, what are the skills that HR leaders should be developing to make sure that they're equipped to handle reputational management?
Yeah, so I think there's, to summarise that, I think there's probably sort of four key areas that I think sort of HR sort of leaders should be taking on sort of board. And the first of that is strategic communication. So that is around understanding and presenting clarity in a very kind of complex environment. So that sort of communication skill is sort of key. The leadership in terms of sort of guiding people through uncertainty. So that's around sort of approach, understanding kind of the guardrails and how sort of messaging can sort of be part of that. Crisis readiness, so very much sort of scenario planning. I don't think there's enough of that happens with organisations.
Oh, I couldn't agree more than
Message
that.
shaping,
Couldn't
stakeholder
agree more than
planning.
that. Yeah.
That's not the job just of sort of PR. And I think the fourth one, and probably the most important, that is moving at phenomenal pace, is digital literacy. And certainly that is something that I'm finding comms people were trying to keep up on that with not just the likes of sort of social platforms like Glassdoor or Google Review, but how AI platforms and AI search is coming into that mix. And it's understanding then how news and stories can stick or not stick, and the role of sort of that digital and sort of social media channels part of that HR mix. And I think that in particular is a really underserved part of sort of HR, but phenomenally important.
That's been brilliant. Thank you so much, Liz. I think, it's just a fascinating area and one that HR can no longer just abdicate and kind of leave to the PR comms people. I think it's a vital role that HR plays in kind of shaping what people believe about our organization, because that's ultimately what's going to get into the public consciousness about the black brand reputation, and we can't separate that out. So it's that I think as HR professionals we do have a huge role to play, not just when things go badly wrong in the crisis management, but in the proactive management of our brand reputation, particularly through employee advocacy. So thank you so much for joining me today, Liz.
Great. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed that. Thank you.
So if you've enjoyed this episode, please do leave a review, share it with your network, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And as always, if you've got ideas for topics or guests you'd love to hear from, do get in touch with us at hello@disruptivehr.com. Bye for now. Hi, I hope you found this useful. If you'd like more videos like this, then make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications.